Greetings, beautiful Herle Burlyites. Here's something you all might relate to. You know when you go in for a medical test and they give you one of those blue hospital gowns that tie up in the back? Scott, are you okay?
Really? I wear those all the time. I have
You have them around the
a
house.
vast array at home. I like them.
Well, you know, they tie up in the back and you try to tie it up, but I bet you have this problem
I don't
too.
bother.
You can't
I don't
quite
try
get that. You
even.
don't even try. So then the hatch end ends up being not quite battened down.
That's right.
Right?
I got a
And,
great hatch.
More Reid than anybody wants to see is what happens. Okay, that's just you.
Okay.
That's just you.
I don't think so.
But for over 235,000 Canadians burdened by the challenges of homelessness, access to proper and dignified health care is a real problem. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, believes that every Canadian should have access to health care when and where they need it, regardless of socioeconomic status. And their Health for Good program brings mobile health clinics to our most vulnerable communities to deliver the care and support they need. People with complex mental health and addiction issues often face barriers accessing traditional medical care, yet urgently need help. The healthcare professionals on board the mobile health clinics powered by TELUS Health use electronic medical record technology on the TELUS LTE Wi-Fi network to deliver immediate and quality care in the communities that need it most. Services include, and you might be interested in this, Scott, routine testing, contraception, STI treatment, harm reduction services, and mental health care, immunizations, counseling, and more. By the end of 2020, TELUS's mobile health clinics will be coast to coast, enabling 25,000 patient interactions per year. To learn more about the TELUS Health for Good program, go to connectingcanadaforgood.ca.
That was a bit unfair. Like, I'm joking about, you know where we're going. I don't. I'm joking about my fat, dimpled ass sticking out, and all of a sudden, boom, you pivot into homelessness, and I sound like I'm being glib about something that's very serious.
No, you just sound like you're the most likely person of this group to have an STI.
Well, I'd like to try. I don't know. I'd like to shift my lifestyle to put myself into a risk category, but...
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Herle Burly with our political panel, Scott, Reid, and Jenni Byrne. Welcome, Scott. Welcome,
Hi.
Jenni.
Hi.
Both of them are crack political strategists.
Crack.
Both of them are funny and do not suffer fools. One of them has left his perfect butt imprint on a bar stool at the Bistro on Avenue Road. A couple of weeks ago on the pod, I asked you beautiful Herle Burlyites might help us come up with a name for our Jenni Scott segments other than the political panel. And you rose to the challenge, my friends, and here are some of our faves so far crowdsourced from you. Tory with a side of grits, which sounds breakfasty and delicious. Byrne after reading.
That's my favorite.
Maybe we
good.
can sell the pod movie rights to the Coen brothers for that
There
one.
we go.
State of the fucking nation or the swear jar panel. Both those are very on brand. The unholy trinity, and this one was enthusiastically suggested by more than one person. I'm comfortable with being Satan. Which one of you is the Antichrist?
Oh, not me.
Oh.
No, I am Christ. She can be Antichrist.
Christ off the cross, as you always say.
That's Christ off the cross. Like, come
Jenni
down.
and the blowhards. Thank you for your bluntness and
that.
accurateness.
I like that. That's good.
And finally, super cool Scott Reid and two other people. That, you might have guessed,
was
Scott's
yours.
contribution.
It's true I wrote it, but many people approached me with similar themes.
Anyway, we're going to keep the lines open for another couple of weeks on this, so keep those ideas coming. Scott, Jenni, let's get to it for today's discussion, and let's start with the Conservative leadership race.
Woohoo.
And there's a few things to talk about here, but one of the things that interested me this week was, or since we last talked, was Peter MacKay's entrance into the race and the way he entered the race. His entrance was not unexpected, but he just sent out a tweet saying, "I'm in," and then went silent.
Right.
And there's been no further news from the MacKay camp since he did that. Except for today, I noticed this morning that my Twitter feed is full of people endorsing him. So that's the next, apparently, phase of the online thing. Kind of unprecedented way of announcing for a major candidate. You're the comms expert. What do you think?
I liked it. I thought that it drew a lot of attention. I mean, obviously, first, you got the fun, improvised, but predictable pile-on of people going, you're in, right? You're like, in jail, you're in a well, you're in love, right? You're in deep shit. You don't remember if you're a conservative or a progressive conservative. And so I thought, so it provoked not just a viral reaction, but it provoked a reaction and a buzz across the political landscape. And, that sort of soft launch then opened the door for what you just then discussed, which is a whole series of endorsements. And let me just evaluate it this way, right? First, without doing anything, he's generated talk and discussion about his candidacy. Second, I, as someone that's, quite distant, obviously, from the Conservative Party leadership, am gaining the impression, osmotically, that he's a much more robust candidate than I might have necessarily assumed, and that the breadth of his support, particularly from more conservative elements of the party than I might have expected, is there. And so I think it's given him a nice sort of pace momentum. So I can't quarrel with it.
So he's not the first candidate to announce on Twitter that he's running. Christine Elliott did that for the last provincial campaign. She almost similar. I'm in. Yeah. I'm running. Whatever it was. I think it was smart. It's quick. He's in. Everyone knew he was in. He has a big event. I'm told scheduled in New Glasgow.
Is it Saturday? Right.
Saturday.
Yeah. We wear the big wellies and had the dog and all that. I mean, that's what people are gonna.
So he's going to launch at home.
He'll launch at home. He'll launch at home. He lives in a place called Stellarton, which is right beside New Glasgow, and is in Pictou County. So there's rumors that he has 30 plus MPs that are supporting him. We'll see if they're there. Listen, endorsements are nice, but they don't really generate, in our leadership race, in our format, they don't really generate much. And if you look back at the last leadership race, it's not like MPs deliver their ridings.
They can't deliver their riding?
Look back in the last one, they didn't. It's not like it's a delegated convention where someone falls off and, Bob Smith says, I'm going to bring my 12 delegates and I'm bringing them to you. It really isn't that much of a leadership race. I'm not saying it's not good momentum for him, but I'm not sure how much it actually brings to the table in terms of organization.
Right. How much has he benefited from the other perceived candidates on that wing of the spectrum, the profile ones like Charest and Ambrose not running?
Listen, I don't know. I think that probably in a fundraising perspective, especially with Jean Charest not running, it helps Peter. Yeah. They're kind of fishing from the same pond, not just in terms of voters, but in terms of people that can raise money and give money. When you only can get donations of $1,650 for this calendar year. Our last leadership race was over 2 years. So people that gave checks could give it in 2016 and 2017. So for me, I gave 2 checks. So I gave, it's public. I gave it to Aaron O'Toole.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Rats. I was hoping you were going to say Kevin O'Leary so we could all make Kevin O'Leary jokes.
No, if you remember, I publicly.
You were slagging him hard.
Yeah, I have a problem.
We should go on the record as just saying he is a complete and utter tit. I have a problem
when liberals.
He's the most annoying man. Well,
I have a problem when liberals want to run for the Conservative Party leadership, which is why I had a problem with Jean Charest.
Well, okay, so
all right, come on,
do that. Why is he a liberal?
Yeah.
Well, he was a liberal premier.
But that's bullshit. You know that the Liberal brand in the province of Quebec is not liberal in the sense of federal politics, just as it isn't in British Columbia.
Fine.
It's the Federalist Party until, the cat kind of threw it all apart.
That's fine. But Conservatives do not support the long gun registry. They do not support carbon taxes. They do not support the Liberals throwing away their support of the State of Israel at the UN. And those are all things that Jean Charest supports. Wow. So take away the fact that he was a Liberal premier. He supports Liberal policies.
Well, boy, I mean, I think his announcement was pretty significant.
And his announcement came basically because there was a bunch of polling done, and he saw that there was zero path to victory, not just within our leadership race, but also with the Canadian electorate.
Okay, didn't know that. I didn't know that, but I thought it was significant that he felt, and he seemed a bit angry to me the way the statement.
Sure, felt that way.
Yeah, it was very chippy. Yeah. Like, go fuck you guys.
I'm not running because I can't run, and that tells you something about the shitty party that I wanted to be the leader of.
Right, but to take Jenni.
I'm speaking in his voice. That was the tone I detected.
To take Jenni on for a second, I mean, the guy has never supported any other federal political party than the Conservative Party. He led the Progressive Conservative Party.
22 years ago.
The platform he ran under was written by the Harris Common Sense Revolution people, so he was not running on a left-wing liberal platform, and by Quebec standards was a center-right. By Quebec standards was a center-right premier, and he can't find enough support to run for the leadership.
Well, because he hasn't been part of our party for 22 years.
Okay.
Like, he hasn't been part of our party for 22 years.
Let me make a statement that is overreaching and overly profound and ridiculously so, but I still think that it may become true. The fact that Jean Charest is not running might well condemn the Conservative Party to losing in the next election.
Oh, my goodness.
And the reason I say that is that it is, just as he has been forced to confront that the Conservative Party of today has no place for Jean Charest, lots of center-right voters who are not as fully steeped in the complete catechism as you just enunciated it a few minutes ago will say, I guess I got no place either.
Okay,
and so I think I think the signal that's being sent right away is, you know what, our clubhouse is very limited.
That's not fair. For the reasons I just said, would you guys have running in for a Liberal Party leadership someone who was anti-gun registry, was anti-carbon tax? No, you wouldn't. There's just certain fundamentals that you would not have of someone that's going to lead the Liberal Party. And for Conservatives, Jean Charest has not been part of the party for 22 years. He's done nothing to help the party. Sure, he might not have campaigned, but actually, no, he did campaign. He campaigned against Stephen Harper in 2008. So I'm not really sure why anyone thought that it would be a natural fit for...
He campaigned against him?
Yes,
Really?
in 2008 on the gun registry.
So a Charest candidacy is implausible for the modern Conservative Party, but a hard SoCon candidacy is not implausible.
Like who, for who?
Well, I mean, Trost and all the people. I mean, we'll see who emerges in this round, but obviously we saw that in the last round. So I'm just saying, you know, it's why isn't it plausible that Charest could run, and maybe he can't find a constituency?
Sure,
but it's
he should. He's not running because he can't find the support. So it's totally plausible he can run. He could get his 3,000 signatures. He could get his $300,000, but he's not running because he couldn't win.
Okay. So those issues are so definitive that if you're offside on them, you literally can't win. Like you cannot be, be a successful candidate for the Conservative leadership if you believe in more restrictive gun control than we currently have.
I'm not saying that. I am saying that Jean Charest was a Liberal premier who campaigned against Stephen Harper a decade ago.
Right. Okay.
So to run for the modern Conservative Party as it is now seems very implausible. And if there was support within our party over there's 180 some thousand members, he would be running.
Right. And will, by the way, just as an aside, will this thing be decided by the existing membership or by new sales?
I think there'll be some new sales, but I think there's 180, as I said, 180 some thousand members. I think a lot of it'll be the current membership.
When's the cutoff? Like
April 27th.
Right.
2 months
so
before.
It's a pretty short runway.
Yeah, 2 months before.
A lot of people have made the argument, conservatives have made the argument that this race has been structured, to benefit those that are already in. Right? Like that it's, again, I keep going back to the closed door clubhouse a little bit. Like I know it's an overstatement, but it's given that vibe, feels to me. Short runway.
But it's a minority government. We have to get a leader elected.
Okay.
Pierre Poilievre
Who dat?
did something on the leadership this week, which is he, in French, in Quebec, staked out a position on social issues.
Yes.
Right? So there's two things that are interesting about that to me, one of which is that he chose to preemptively do that before he's even formally announced his candidacy.
Well, he was asked about it, so he had to answer, yeah.
Right? And second of all, that he did it in French in Quebec.
Yep.
Can you take us through the calculus?
I think there's not much calculus. He was doing media he was in Montreal. He was doing media and he was asked questions regarding his position on different social issues, and he answered them in French. So I think there's probably more thought given to any form of strategy, but that's where Pierre stands. So he said that he supports same-sex marriage, which is obvious, and that in terms of abortion, he will not prevent private members' bills. No prime minister can prevent private members' bills. It's our parliamentary democracy. But at the same time, they're not going to pass.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
Right.
So you're saying it was almost happenstance that I mean, I guess my school of thought has always been that if something bad happens that I'm associated with, I say that it was unpredictable chance. But if something good happens that I'm associated with, I say it was absolutely a deliberate, planned out strategy that I authored and executed. So don't you want to take credit? I think it was a smart move. Like I looking in from the outside, I thought that it was a deliberate move prior to his candidacy, stake some ground, do it in Quebec, do it on the record in French. I thought that it was smart because, one, it was a substantive issue, not just the partisan cheeky Pierre Poilievre that we know. And two, it staked territory that was obviously enormously topical in the context of the Conservative race after Andrew Scheer and his insufficiencies in the last campaign. So I thought it was smart strategy. Like, I can't see a downside to it. There might be some SoCons that say, okay, you're off our list. We have to go get
Well,
Cuckoo
he went to a cannot support rating from Campaign Life Coalition. So I don't know what the cost of
Does that hurt? Like, is it a big deal?
Well, I mean, Granick Allen and McVitie were players in the provincial leadership.
That's what I'm asking.
Big players in the
I'm
provincial
looking at Jenni and I'm saying it must bear some consequence, right?
I have said this before. Social conservatives are a vital part of our electoral and of our party base. But at the end of the day, Pierre's positions are his positions. He's not going to pretend to say or do anything contrary to what he actually plans to.
Fair enough. I'm asking in addition to that, though. I'll accept that it's a point of principle and a personally held view. I absolutely believe that. But what's the strategic implication? Like, does it open up much space on that flank? Is there room on that flank, but there just isn't a good enough standard bearer for the SoCons to merge? Like to me, I don't see who the SoCon standard bearer is who's going to emerge. Like, and I didn't exactly think Brad Trost was like,
Well, apparently you don't have to be very impressive.
Right? No.
They've chosen Tom Wappel in the past. They've chosen Brad Trost as their standard bearer. Right?
Yeah, and it bears pointing out with Tom Wappel. Like, I mean, this is a phenomenon within the Liberal Party.
They're probably
also,
the only
right?
people who would find you and I to be acceptable candidates for office.
But I'm just saying, how much space might, like, if someone was sitting around the table saying, "Well, we got to be careful because there's this much room." Is it much room in the context of the current debate within the Conservative Party?
I think we'll have to see how the debate proceeds.
Okay. Do we know the field pretty much?
Yeah. Well, you got Peter's in, obviously. Pierre's in. You got Aaron O'Toole, and then you have some other candidates like Marilyn Gladue and Rick
Who
Peterson.
I thought was going to be the SoCon standard bearer, but she's
not a SoCon.
Not really positioned that way, right?
There really isn't. There was our MP for Hastings Frontenac. I forget his name right now.
Right, down in my neck of the woods.
He tweeted that he was going to run. So we'll see how it plays out. The issue is though raising $300,000 and getting 3,000 signatures across the country. It's a lot more daunting than people think that.
No, that's a big job. That's a big job.
And so
just the money's a big job.
The money's a huge job, and so candidates, I think, can pardon me, they can I think lend themselves $50,000 to be paid back afterwards. But otherwise, you're raising $250,000. So we'll see what happens. But I think there's a lot of people, or there's a few people saying they're going to run, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to make the benchmarks.
Right. Okay. Right. One of the things I'm going to be looking for over the months of this thing, because it's interesting given the conversation we've had today, is I presume that all the candidates feel that in order to become prime minister, they need to make some gesture to urban Canada that starts to open up that electoral battleground a little bit. And in the absence of being able to move on things like guns or climate, I'm going to be interested to see what that is. That symbol or that gesture to urban Canada. In any event, we have to take a break for a word from our sponsor, and we will be back with bilingualism of all things. In the meantime, a message from our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association. Trust. It's at the heart of every successful relationship, especially when it comes to buying a home. Ontario's 80,000 realtors are trusted every day to help their clients navigate one of, if not the largest financial transaction of their lives, buying a home. Representing Ontario's 80,000 realtors, the Ontario Real Estate Association is on a mission to increase trust and professionalism in Ontario's real estate industry. That means stronger rules to punish bad behavior, access to modern business tools, and better education. The Trust in Real Estate Services Act, or TRESA, delivers on that mission. TRESA is a groundbreaking piece of legislation that will make Ontario a leader in North America when it comes to real estate professionalism and trust. Go to www.orea.com to learn more. Okay, now, Ken White, and I'm not going to hear any talk that Ken White isn't a conservative, because when he's from Edmonton, when Conrad Black wanted to set up...
He's from Edmonton, so therefore he must be a conservative.
High probability, and...
Redmonton.
When Conrad Black wanted to set up a conservative counterweight to what he perceived as the liberal newspaper establishment in Canada, he chose Ken White to run that newspaper and be the intellectual director of that. And the guy just wrote a biography of Herbert Hoover, for Christ's sake. So yes, he's a conservative.
That's pretty good. I've read it.
And he wrote an op-ed in the Globe and Mail that said that the Conservatives should not really care whether their leader is bilingual or not. And the rationale he gave is that having a bilingual leader does not help you win seats in Quebec if you're English. That in any contest in which there is a Quebec francophone in the race, that person will get will win in Quebec versus Anglophones. And history pretty much bears that out as a thesis. You're really hard-pressed, unless you include Leighton, and Leighton was from Montreal, but you're really hard-pressed to find an example of where an Anglo has outdone a Franco in an election in Quebec, even if they were bilingual. And I remember a very, very telling moment, and I can't remember whether it was Chantal or not, but somebody was interviewing Michael Wilson in the 1983 Conservative race, and his French was very, very good. But he didn't understand anything about Quebec or its culture. And at some point in the interview, or Chantal or whoever it was said, it's about more than just speaking French, right? You have to get it. So Ken White's theory is double down on the places you can win. Ontario, pick a leader that will win you Ontario, and don't worry about Quebec, because you're only going to win 5-6 seats there anyway. So... But, what do you think?
So, and I think I think I've said this on the pod before, is I think that Ontarians, when they're electing a prime minister, when they're voting, they actually see bilingualism as a necessity. When was the last time that Ontario voted for a leader that did not speak French? Pearson? Did Pearson speak French?
No,
very poor.
Yeah,
no, we did not.
So
really at all.
that's the last one, so I think that even though Ontario voters understand the need that their prime minister needs to be able to communicate with the 78 seats in Quebec, so I think it is a necessity, and I think it's something that our I think our members look at. If you look in the last leadership race, Andrew spoke passable French, and up on the host of 15 people or 14 people that ran, he actually spoke decent French. He was as bilingual as that cast was going to be, but he wasn't able to punch him at his weight. In the French debates, he struggled. It was a huge story. And so I think our members are pragmatic enough and understand that our next leader needs to be able to parlay in both official languages. So
the ability to speak French is not about winning seats in Quebec particularly, it's about winning seats in Ontario.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Scott?
I agree with that point generally. I think that 50 years on of official bilingualism, or where we're getting into that neighborhood, I think there is a notion that has anchored itself in a sizable portion of the country, and certainly large chunks of the country, like Ontario, that bilingualism is a credential for national leadership at that level. So I agree with Jenni on that basis. When it comes to Ken's article, I think it's difficult to quarrel with his observations, but I think he reached a peculiar conclusion. To me, the obvious conclusion is elect Jean Charest, right? Like, the conclusion isn't, and therefore, since they're always going to pick the favorite son, they're always going to, on balance, pick the the native Quebecer, Pierre Franco. So don't sweat it. If you want to be, he's setting the piece up to say, listen, no bullshit. I'm going to be mercenary about this. Well, then no bullshit. Let's be mercenary about it. Leads to the conclusion of pick a Pierre Franco Quebecer, right? And you're all just win. And that's essentially, without being quite that caustic about it, what Brian Mulroney used to say in the 70s, right? He used to say, you give Pierre Trudeau a 75 seat advantage, he's going to beat you, 10 times out of 11. So, go nuts. So I found it kind of it was a fun, provoking column, but I think the fundamental conclusion was kind of odd. By the way, on this issue, you talked about the example of Michael Wilson. I was struck by it as a unilingual Anglophone, which always was a challenge for me, right? Like I'm for sure was the last, I believe, had to have been the last director of communications in the Prime Minister's office who was a unilingual. No? You think, okay. Well, all I know is that
I'm going back for us. I think we had like two that spoke French. The rest were unilinguals.
Well, Jason certainly spoke French.
Jason.
Corey speaks French.
No, Corey
possibly.
doesn't speak French.
No?
No.
Oh, I thought he did. Anyway,
Demetrius speaks French, but those are the only two.
I was super self-conscious of it when I was in the job.
He speaks ethanol fluently.
Yes, he does. He does. Biofuel. You have to.
Corn cob Bob.
It's not corn cob Bob. It's not just ethanol. It could be biomass. Right? But I was really self-conscious of that when I was in the office, and Francophone and Quebec-based members of the gallery, like Chantal and stuff, were always gracious to me, but would say no. But it was an issue. And
you were good, though. You didn't make nearly as many mistakes in French as you did in English.
That's true. Yeah. No, and I had quite a string of fuck-ups. But the other, lay fuck up. It was Paul, though, that really anchored it for me, because I'd spent 15 years being surrounded by casual conversation of Paul Martin is a fluently bilingual, bicultural, Montreal-based MP, and then when he became prime minister, suddenly the observation was, you know what, this guy's French is not quite where it needs to be. And so that...
Did people say that? I don't remember that.
For sure. Yeah. Particularly after the Francophone debates, after the French debates, you certainly heard that observation. And I'm not sure that it was unfair. Like, I think the expectation of his bilingualism exceeded the reality of it, and nobody was as thoroughly exposed to it until, they're really scrutinizing him as a prime minister, not just a finance minister or a candidate. But it was a punishing test. And I think it bugged him. Like,
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult club to join, as we know. I think that the last point that he raises, which is worth considering, is that probably a relatively small percentage of elected or prominent conservatives actually are fluently, perfectly bilingual. So you're leaving some real talent out of consideration for the leadership by insisting on this credential, and that's just the way politics is now. It's just, I think you're right. Same thing applies in the Liberal Party. Ralph Goodale is a guy, who's never considered to be leader because doesn't speak French.
Yeah.
You just can't be the leader of the Liberal Party if you don't speak French. But
and it's a valid point, but doesn't it fall under the category of tough things that you might not like, but are nonetheless indisputably true and unavoidable? Like, it's like,
but it's not
luck.
like, if you even go back to 20 years ago for the 2000 leadership race for the Canadian Alliance, there were people that loved Preston Manning that ended up voting for Stockwell Day because Stock could speak a little bit of French. And the reason they did that was because they thought, okay, well, we need a leader that can, be able to participate in the debate in French. And so I think that any political party that is electing a leader, like, you can say it doesn't matter, but can you imagine going into the French debates and having a leader who cannot speak a word of it?
Yeah,
it's just
it feels like you're hanging a "please kick the shit out of me" sign on yourself.
Right. All right, Ken. Sorry about that, man. We give it a good run. The government, the quiet government had a cabinet retreat in Winnipeg this week. And I've never been to one of these. You two were in government. What happens at one of these things? What's the point of them? What are you doing? Are they sitting around meditating? Are they in endless meetings, briefings?
It's to eat fancy. It's to eat $5 donuts.
No, it's a cleansing. It's a cleansing, really. It's kind of a retreat, right? You get holistic.
I'm going to be honest. In all the years we were in government, I went to one. We did our cabinet retreats mostly at Meech Lake. I think we might have done one in Quebec City. Right. But even when I was, deputy chief of staff, I left it like smarter people policy, wanks or wonks, whatever we want to call them.
Wanks.
Wanks. Did it. People like the Prime Minister's Director of Policy, Rachel Curran, and others that were part of them. So for us, it was less of, there was more of a media presence with Trudeau. Like he did in Vale in Winnipeg. Yeah. He was out and about, bought the donuts, which I think anyone complaining about that is ridiculous. So what, like, he bought donuts that weren't from Tim Hortons. Tim Hortons is owned by an American. Like, the whole thing is ridiculous to me.
Wait a second. Just stop for a second, because I don't want to come back to this, but I do have a kind of a point of view about it, which is, yes, it's ridiculous as an issue, but at the same time, this was a planned photo op.
Yep.
This was a thought-through, planned photo op. And because they sent the Prime Minister out to get these donuts. So they wanted this image, right? I don't think they should have bought from Tim Hortons. I hate Tim Hortons. Their food, the people, the people that own it.
Nothing wrong with Tim Hortons.
Right? Hate Tim Hortons.
Like to piss on Tim Hortons all of a sudden. It's not fair.
But if you're planning a photo op, you're probably shouldn't be buying $5 donuts.
Yeah, but it's a local business. It's a local Winnipeg business. Like how am I on the side that I'm defending Justin Trudeau to you?
I'm only making the observation that there are not very many Canadians that would consider spending $5 on a donut.
Oh, for fuck's sake, pull the carrot out. Like, a guy just goes to a local business and says, hey, I'm going to buy some donuts. And even the person who ran the place says, yeah, and everybody's getting all wound up about the cost of the donuts. Well, that's just like the most expensive donut on the menu. Like, he didn't spend a bucket load of money. I don't think it was an extraordinary weird thing, and he was supporting a local business.
It's not a big political issue, and it shouldn't bring down the government.
But you're talking about it.
If you're planning a photo op, if you're planning a photo op. All right. Anyway, forget about the.
What's your favorite donut?
Glazed.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite donut?
I actually don't like donuts.
You don't like?
No,
donuts?
I'm more of a chips. I like salt. Like.
I like chips.
You're savory.
I
thought you were sweet, but you're savory.
Yeah.
I like the plain cake donut. I like the plain cake Tim's donut, like just nice and...
Tim's?
Yeah, I like the plain cake donut, it's nice.
You mean that was made 7 years ago in Korea and frozen?
Oh, it's gorgeous. They make them every day in Marmara.
All right, forget about Tim Hortons. Back to the cabinet retreat. Yep. Did they have a message? Did they get a message out, Scott?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of dimensions to it. One is just location. And so you have summer caucus or you have a cabinet retreat and you're saying, listen, we're coming and we're showering some attention and trying to highlight our attachment to this place or our hope for attachment to this place. So, and governments have done that in the past. I thought they had a message. I thought they basically had a message that, that echoes kind of the thematic message they've had for the period since the election, which is we're down to work. I don't think it was a lot more glamorous than that. It wasn't an issue-based one. It wasn't like we're responding now in this way to the Ukrainian airliner being shot down. It was more like we are here, we're preparing, we're doing our knitting, and we're focusing, which I think is all going to be interesting to see if we have a different kind of budget. Because it feels like they're trying to set the stage for that, for a budget that's got more of a storyline, more of a focus, eats up more space and oxygen in the government narrative than their budgets have traditionally for the past 4 years.
Where are you seeing those signals?
In the way in which all the stuff we've talked about, the measured way in which the Prime Minister has been employed, the way in which Chrystia Freeland has been advancing on issues, like it feels workman-like, the tone, and I don't think it's indeliberate. And I think that the cabinet retreat was part of that. Down to brass tacks, getting our shit together, preparing for the session that's coming up. What I like about cabinet retreats, and I used to go to them, to be honest, is that as a wank, what I liked about them was it actually gave those folks an opportunity to shoot the shit on stuff. Because often the reality of cabinet, and most people may not have this experience.
They don't talk about stuff.
They don't talk about stuff. It's a very, you have cabinet committees where they'll have an argument about stuff, but then by the time it gets to full cabinet, often full cabinet, regular full cabinet would be a gavel, gavel, gavel. Okay, David, you've got an item, you presented it up, okay, boom, we go through it, and you're just getting cabinet approval. It's almost a kind of, let's get the gazetting of this thing done, let's get the system and machinery of government stuff done. Whereas the cabinet retreats, you would say things like, okay, now we're going to have a presentation, and we're going to do a deep dive on this, and we're going to have a fat argument about it. And that happens less frequently in government than people would think. And it's useful because you got senior officials and a bunch of departments arguing about that stuff with cabinet ministers. And I think you actually also, as a staffer, you would see in that environment who does and who doesn't have game, who is and who isn't on top of shit, who knows not just their portfolio but other people's portfolio, who knows when to talk and when to shut the fuck up, right? Because there's always the cabinet minister it speaks on every item ad nauseum. So those are admittedly wanky reasons for liking a cabinet retreat, but those are the reasons I like them.
Well, from a comms point of view, it'll be interesting. I think that the Liberals are starting their caucus retreat today or tomorrow. So they'll have all their MPs in town. Pardon me. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's any communications messaging out from the caucus retreat. And I think the caucus retreat is just in Ottawa. We had a couple of caucus retreats, and the last one we had that would be a retreat outside of was in PEI in 2007, and it was beautiful. It was August, PEI 2007. And I remember sitting there, and one of our communications staff got into a fight with the media in the lobby of the Delta and I was sitting and having breakfast, and basically tried to kick the media out of the Delta Hotel lobby. And it wasn't working. And I remember
that was on brand.
I remember sitting there on my, the blueberries that were like, so I was like going through my email like bloop, 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 and going, well, this is going to be the start to a great retreat. But and it's funny. I was saying to you guys before we started that was a caucus retreat where a bunch of us went out for beer at they have a ton of craft breweries in Charlottetown, and the Prime Minister stayed back and actually babysat people's kids. He had his kids there. Ian and Vita Brody, the chief of staff at the time, were there. Their little girl Chloe, he babysat. And anyway, so that's the last caucus retreat.
Sweet.
Yeah,
that's putting a very nice.
I was never at a cabinet retreat. I was at 2 caucus retreats.
Yeah,
I have a nice story and a not nice story. The nice story is I was at a caucus retreat in Shawinigan, and Senator Frank Mahovlich brought homemade brownies for everybody in the caucus.
He used every Christmas he would bring a big crate of apples around, and so he would come in and he would bring apples.
Yeah, so I thought that was really homemade brownies was a really nice touch. The bad story was we had a caucus retreat in Regina, and I was presenting to the caucus, and I somehow inexplicably compared myself to Keith Davey, which many members of the caucus in 2005 did not think was accurate, and. And it was, had a little mess I had to clean up internally after that. Anyway, Trudeau and the Liberals are in a really sweet position right now, it seems like to me. The Conservatives are in a leadership race. The NDP basically announced this week they're downing tools for a year and a half or something like that.
Well, who would notice?
Right.
They had a caucus retreat, and it was like a tree falls in the forest. You even know it happens.
They're invisible. It's like back to being bad.
Well, no. He's got some tough conditions for NAFTA.
No, the only thing I see
has some tough conditions for NAFTA.
But the only thing I saw of consequence in the news this week is Alexander Boulerice came out and said that he's calling on the government to not pay for Harry and Yoko Ono's expenses, security expenses, and Singh came out and said that he would consider it. So you even have little
and that's
issues
an issue
like
they
that.
should be splitting on as a party. So
you would have thought they'd have worked that one out. Wow. Yeah.
BQ say they'd like 4 years, and Trudeau and the Liberals have a bump in the polls. They look like they're up at around 40%. They've opened up a 7 or 8 point lead on the Conservatives. So nobody's going to want an election in the near future.
Exactly. But we're leader. We don't have a leader.
Although apparently that can be when you're most popular. Look at the Ontario Liberals. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Speaking of the Ontario Liberals, the Ford government. I'm interested in watching it right now because on the one hand, it looks to me like this teacher strike is, as you would have predicted, Scott, turning into absolute quicksand for them. On the other hand, there have been a couple of polls out recently, and the things that people have most commented on about those polls have been that the Liberals are in the lead and that the NDP are not doing well. But the other interesting thing to me is that the Conservatives, after sort of free fall post-election in the first year of their government, seem to have stabilized and steadied at around 31% of the vote, and that leaves them in a very competitive place to mount a re-election bid 2 years from now.
Yeah, I think that's hard to dispute. But, I think they have two fundamental problems. One, that appears to not only be their floor, but their ceiling. So we'll see. I mean, there have been very few moments in the calendar since Doug Ford became leader where that party really cruised much above 33%. That's kind of been its band the whole time. Right. And so when it's doing really bad, it's at 28, and when it's doing, really well, it's at 33. Fortunately for him, he got above that mark right around election time for a whole variety of factors. But that's they've got to show what's the basis for growth, and I think something like this teacher strike, which looks like it's going to drag on until blood is just absolutely drained from folks. And I do think it's bad. I think the report cards, the move to elementary school strikes, it disrupts my life enormously, right? Kids can't go to school. I got to rearrange everything. Everybody's life is like that. And at some point, it doesn't matter if I'm mad at the school. It doesn't matter if I'm mad at the teachers and I'm pissed off about, what do you mean I'm not getting a report card? Eventually, I turn to the government and I say, you fucking own this, so fix it. So I think that's a big problem for them. But I also think Ford's a problem. I think that if 30 is good, but it also becomes a trap. And at some point, this discussion about Ford and his limitations is going to start to move around the government again. And people are going to say, we got to get out of the 30 box or we're not getting reelected. And once they get this teachers thing over with, the biggest barrier to getting out of that box is going to be Ford himself. And I think it'll be interesting to see if that party ever starts to have that discussion in a direct way, or whether they just kind of march toward.
Well, Jenni would be the expert in that, obviously, but I think they've had that conversation and kind of gotten over it. I think they're kind of getting comfortable with Ford as leader now, because in his first year, I had a number of conversations with Conservatives who said to me, well, I wouldn't expect that Ford will be the leader in the next election. This thing is such a shit show. It's so bad that he won't survive. And I don't hear that anymore from people.
I think you're misreading that. I agree with all that. You're not hearing it anymore. But that was, he's on fire and it's a crisis and it's got to stop. Now it's stopped. But there's a sequel to that conversation, which is we got to get reelected. And this guy's an anchor, not a kite.
Listen, there is a lot of game left. It's 2.5 years before the next election.
Right.
If the government's going to do, it has to make hard decisions, including changes in terms of education. Now is the time to do it. 2.5 years is a long time, and I think there's a definite path to victory.
So I want to be careful that I'm not just seeing this through my own eyes, Jenni. So help me with this. When he was appointed education minister, I sensed a lot of excitement among conservative activists. I don't know if I can say his name properly.
Stephen Lecce.
Lecce.
Yeah, okay. Good guy. He worked for me back in the Prime Minister's office.
So people said this guy's a star. This guy's got real comms chops. Watch him. He's going to be. So he's in this. From your perspective, how's he handling it?
I think he's doing a great job. I think that he is a young guy who was thrown into the lion's den, so to speak, and I think he's handling it well. I think that it is a tough job, and he's holding his own.
I think they're crippling him.
Pardon?
I think they're crippling him.
It's a terrible thing to do to a young star, really, if you think the person's a comer, is to drop them into a teacher strike as their first job.
It's not just that he has to handle the tough issue and be a face of the government on this issue as it drags on and becomes more challenging and difficult, but I think I detect a change in tone when people who aren't affiliated with politics talk about him. He used to be kind of young, interesting, okay, cool, willing to give the guy the benefit of the doubt, but now it's guy looks too cocksure, too smug. I just sense that, and maybe none of that's fair, and maybe all that's a function of how the issue is just tough and you got to wear it more. But I just think they got to cave on this thing. I don't understand why you would undo all the stuff. They unfucked up all their fuck ups, right? And then said, we're gonna go to the mattresses on this thing with the teachers. And I just think the governments that screw with teachers end up paying the price. Dalton McGuinty did. It certainly didn't help Kathleen win. And I think these guys are going to regret it.
It never hurt Mike Harris.
Well,
between 97 and
I think the Mike Harris should have lost the 99 election. I
don't think so. And I say this is
the Liberals think they won on education. The Liberals believe they won the 2003 election.
But they weren't campaigning against
education.
But I'm talking about 5 years before that or 6 years before that. Between 97 and the 2001 election, my mom was a teacher. She was on the picket lines, and I don't think it hurt Harris at all. I actually think it was contrary. It actually helped Harris. I'm not saying it's helping the government, but I don't think it hurt.
But that's why different perspectives are so interesting. Because for a Liberal government, with our voter coalition, it's absolutely crippling to fight with the teachers. Right? And you can't be in a fight with teachers and be pro-education. It's just hard to be seen that way. So for us, the way we look at this strike is we say, holy God, this is political kryptonite. But you're saying that from a conservative coalition point of view, it's probably not.
I'm just saying in the past, I'm not saying, I am saying that to say that every time a government has made changes to the education system and teachers have gone on strike, it has not caused them electoral, it has not hurt them electorally.
The one difference between this and Harris, I generally actually have a different analysis of Harris. I think he was very vulnerable on education and could have lost the 99 election and didn't, just because Dalton wasn't as ready as he should have been and didn't perform well enough. But if he'd performed better, I think Harris might have been a one-term premier, and a lot of it would have been the definition around him that emerged from the education file. But set that aside. There is a difference between then and now. I think the stakes are smaller around this thing, even as the problem gets bigger. So at least Harris had the benefit of saying, we are trying to do some enormous shit here that can't get done unless we address this as an element of it. So there were big stakes, and it was still it
was in the context
of deficit reduction, where there was public buy-in at the federal and provincial level for that as a top priority. So, the stakes felt larger. Now the stakes of why am I enduring this pain when it's like a 1% difference in pay, and it's like a difference in, it feels like this is just something that they decided they're going to dig in on, and they're going to dig in on it. And so I don't think they communicate in a way that resonates with the public. This is the necessity for this fight. So as long as the fight didn't bug me much, I was okay with it, whatever. But now that the fight is disrupting my life, I'm like, whatever you're getting out of this fight isn't as big as the problem I'm incurring, so fucking stop it.
Well, the labor movement's feisty these days. Jerry Diaz got arrested in Regina.
I saw that.
Speaking of the F word, there are lots of people swearing at those cops, eh? Get your fucking hands off me, eh?
All right. Thanks for this week, you guys. This was fantastic. Jenni, thanks for coming in. I love your new glasses.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Scott, Colin Kaepernick, making two statements, a double-barreled statement.
That's right. Go Niners. And don't forget Cap.
Yeah. There you go.
I kneel.
Thank you all for listening. I would like to thank Spencer Sunshine for recording this episode. And I'd like to thank Andy for the video of this episode. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, TELUS and the Ontario Real Estate Association. And it really helps get this podcast out and around if you support it on social media, and particularly if you go to iTunes and give it a rating and a review, would be very helpful. So thank you very much. And we'll be back as a group in 2 weeks. Keep those names coming on social media. And I'll be back with somebody next week. We'll see you then. Bye.